God does not save people just to save them. God saves the people so they may be with him. You just don't ignore all the protocols. You just don't play with God. God has already done so much. And now he says, I have loved you. I want you to reciprocate that love. I want you to show your love to me. How? By obeying me. In our study of the book of Exodus, we come to Exodus 19. And this is a big moment in how everything goes from here on out. Israel has left Egypt. They have been set free. But now they have arrived at the mountain. This is the mountain. When God first showed up to Moses, he said, you will bring the people out and you will bring them to this mountain so that they may worship me. God does not save people just to save them. God saves the people so they may be with him, that they may worship him, that they may love him and may serve him. Here, God is creating a people for himself who will not only worship him, but God is going to send them out into the world and say, you will represent me to the rest of the world. You will show the rest of the world who I am. You will show them what it means to worship me. You will reveal not only my power, but my character to them. And how will he do this? He will give them his law. Now, we often think about God's law as just simply like a big rule book, a big thing of do's and don'ts. And be honest, we either have a love-hate relationship with it. Either we say, okay, we're saved by doing all these great things, or we say, well, that has no bearing on us whatsoever, so we just ditch it completely. But there's a purpose for it. It's more than a rule book. It shows us God's heart. It shows us his holiness. It shows us what he values. Now, it's important as we go into this time of God's law that we remember this is a continuation of God's promise to Abraham. So it's not like God is starting all over. God is not jettisoning everything he did with Abraham up to this point. God is continuing. This is not an initiation of new relationship. This is a heightening of the relationship. It's kind of like, when you first started dating your spouse, you made all kind of promises to them, and then you got engaged, and then you promised to be with them forever, and then you stood before the altar and you got married. Is that a new relationship each time? I hope not. No. What started off here on a date heightens. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And so God has made this promise to Abraham. And now he brings the people here to worship him. And he's going to show them his power. But now he's going to usher them into his presence. And he's going to reveal himself to them. And he's going to usher them into his presence. But y'all, it is a terrifying presence. Look at verse 16 of our text. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered them. This is a serious matter. It's amazing how these are the people that God loves. These are the people that God has compassion on. These are the people that God has invited to his presence. But when the people arrive, the first thing God says is, stay at a distance. Stay at arm's length. You can't come up here. Why? Because this is God. God is holy. God is righteous. God is powerful. And these were mere mortals coming into his presence. How dare they have that audacity to do that? And God's just saying, and it was scary. I mean, look at this. First of all, the mountain looks scary. Could you imagine seeing that? The big smoke on the mountain, the ominous clouds, the fire that's raging. And it sounded scary. You know, I just look at this. Have you ever been outside in a thunderstorm? When you start hearing that thunder and it gets louder and louder and it cracks and you're like, ah! But then imagine with all this going on, that trumpet is blaring and you hear it and it gets louder and louder and louder. I mean, goodness, I'm getting scared just thinking about it. And it felt scary. Everything was shaking. The whole mountain was shaking. What was happening? The Lord was descending upon this place. It was a powerful presence. And no wonder the people, when they saw this, when they felt this, when they heard this, they were terrified. In fact, they didn't want to speak to God. They said, Moses, you do it for us. Exodus 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. They loved God. They were willing to obey everything God said, but they said he is too powerful. He is too holy for us to be in his presence. Moses, you go in between us. You be the intercessor. Lord, we are terrified of him. It's kind of like this. When I first met my wife, y'all, I wish you could have met her dad. His name was John Pastore. He was a big Italian guy, okay? And he looked just like Tony Soprano. If y'all know Sopranos. And he was the pastor of the church. And so even though I loved John, even though that he loved me, he was kind and compassionate to me, John terrified me as my father-in-law. So there are times when if I had something I need to ask John, I would say, honey, would you mind going and ask your dad further about this? The Israelites knew how powerful God was. And you just don't skip into his presence. You just don't ignore all the protocols. You just don't play with God. In fact, there's an example of this. Leviticus chapter 10. Aaron's sons who were priests. It says, Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense. And get this, they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. And they died before the Lord. And Moses then said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke of what he said. Among those who approach me, I will show myself holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored. And Aaron remained silent. I mean, that breaks my heart. Aaron just lost his two boys. Why? Because they thought they could just do whatever they wanted with God. But you don't play around with God. So how do you have intimacy with such a powerful and scary, fearful God? How do you have a relationship? Is it simply by obeying the rules he gives you? That's what a lot of us think. In order for me to be on God's good side, I will do everything he says, right? But I want you to see something. Look at verse 3. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the house of Jacob. Now notice our language. It's the language of the covenant. The house of Jacob. And what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. Okay, so which came first? The relationship or the obedience? The relationship. God initiated it. God came to them. God came and saved them. God rescued them. God delivered them. God is the one who came. And I love this image. On the wings of an eagle, he carried, he saved them, he brought them out. And then he says, therefore, now that I have done this, now I want you to obey me and keep my covenant. God's going to give them the law, but the law is not there to save them. The law is there to reveal so many more things. This call to obey is given to provide to a God who has already provided them deliverance, who's already redeemed them with the Passover lamb. God has already done so much. And now he says, I have loved you. I want you to reciprocate that love. I want you to show your love to me. How? By obeying me. Obey me, please. So it says in obedience, this is a response to his love. This is the key to Christian life. If you think that you, in order to be loved by God, have to obey everything 100% all the time, then you're going to be so terrified that you're going to mess up one day and God's going to stop loving you. That's not how we live. But it's in response to the fact that God has loved you. Think about it. Everything we do is a response to what God has already done. If you love me, keep my commandments. If we love him, okay, right? And when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples, he said, love one another. But remember what he said before that? As I have loved you. Forgive one another as I have forgiven you. 1 John 4, we love. Why? Because he first loved us. And if we love him, he says, keep my commandments. Everything we do in his response because of his love for us. And he says, if you will obey my commandments, if you will do this, of all the nations, then notice this, all nations are his. The whole world is his. But he says, of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. I love that image. The Hebrew word there is sekula, and it means crown jewel. Kind of like, you're my favorite. And so that will turn a lot of folks off. Let me explain this. Let's suppose you have 2 kids, right? And we know you're not supposed to have favorites with kids, right? I got 3 kids, and I know they watch me, so I love all my kids equally, right? So, depends on which one gets the best Father's Day gift. So, but let's say you have 1 kid, and this kid is a rascal. This kid does not listen to you. This kid does whatever he wants. This kid just completely ignores you. He never calls. He never responds to your text. This kid is just a total chaos in your life. He disobeys every rule you've ever made. In fact, his values are 180% different from yours. Okay? Now, he's still your kid, but man, he's a headache. And then you have another kid. And this kid, he calls every day. Dad, how are you doing? Dad, is there anything I can come do for you? You ask him, say, hey, can you mind cleaning up your room? And he says, right on it, Dad. He does everything he's supposed to do. He loves you, gives you a big hug. His values align with yours. Now, when it comes to which kid would you say is your treasured possession? Now, you wouldn't tell everybody this, but which one? The one who obeys. And that's what God says. You will be my crown jewel.